Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Callum is out traveling this week, so we've got the rest of our usual crew. We've got myself, Danielle Leath, James Reid, and Eric Turigian. And I'm so excited to introduce our special guest today, Caroly Hofstee, who just so happens to be the CEO of HUB International Midwest East, under which I am employed. So thank you so much for being here. Really excited to have you on today.
Excited to be here.
Great. Well, Caroly, I'd love if you would just start by maybe kicking us off and sharing a little bit more about HUB from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So HUB International, a fairly large company. We are currently the 5th largest broker in the world. And, we specialize in really all things insurance. If there's an insurance related need, and then everything that we, that kind of revolves around that from a consulting standpoint, we get into a lot more of the legal side of it now and, compliance and things like that. We get into the risk management side of it. And so HUB's a organization that really works closely with the client to manage kind of all forms of risk, whether it's through insurance or, just good sound risk management strategies. People related, business related, kind of all of the above, personal insurance, really everything. I mean, we've even insured, pigs traveling from London to the US over the ocean. So, things that you'd never even think about happening. Prize pigs, might I add. So, we dabble in just about everything that's insurance related. Great organization, great vision of just growth, and they have consistently performed well. Very young company, less than 25 years old, sort of a Cinderella story. Very romantic if you listen to the whole thing, but they have grown through acquisition and through organic growth, and they're an organization that just believes very strongly in their people and are very supportive of the people that are part of it. Very humble leadership team. Very much servant leadership kind of mentality. So can't say enough good things about the organization. I've been at HUB, it'll be 13 years in March coming up. So a long time, and have had quite an incredible journey with them. So good company.
So on that note, could you briefly explain what position you started at 13 years ago and how you navigated through the inner circles to your current position? And I didn't fully understand the Midwest
East.
Explain what that means to us.
Directionally challenged, yeah. So essentially, just to start with Midwest East, so HUB is basically broken into 28 distinct regions. And each of those regions operates completely autonomously with its own leadership team. So each region has a president or CEO that, then builds a leadership team and a team, under that. And, we actually just function like any normal business, make our own decisions, but live within that kind of corporate umbrella of sharing resources and having more economies of scale because of that. So it's a great business model because it essentially creates 28 large insurance brokers who are all trying to build a better mousetrap. And so we get this sort of, I would say, think tank environment where every region is trying to come up with, the next best way to do it. And we're all sharing that information all the time. Corporately, they're getting us together a lot so we can share ideas and strategies, things we're hearing in the field, just to continue to help our clients to be better. And it's been a great philosophy that, has paid off dividends for our clients over the long haul. So for me, I was a biomedical science major, which is, I started out thinking I was going to be in either pharmaceutical sales or be a physician's assistant, and got into sales because at my first pharmaceutical sales interview, they told me they thought I needed more sales experience. So I got into insurance to get sales experience and just never got out of insurance. Insurance, was something I quickly realized was a great career. And I was fortunate enough fairly quickly to land with HUB, but I didn't start with HUB in my insurance career. When I did make the move to HUB, I came to HUB as a salesperson. I was a producer for them, and I specialized in the employee benefits space. So much like what Danielle is doing today, I went out and consulted with companies all over the place from the standpoint of their employee benefits programs and compliance around that, and wellness and all those things. And I did fairly well in that sales space. And, you know, I had gone to my manager and just said, hey, you know, I really like the leadership side of it. And if there's ever an opportunity, I would love to, you know, even if it's just mentor or coach other producers, I'd love to help in that regard. And luckily he took me seriously. And I moved into sort of a regional mentorship role within Midwest East, which is right now Michigan and Indiana. We have 10 offices and 175 employees. And so, you know, I started out mentoring salespeople, and then about 4.5 years into my sales career at HUB, and, you know, maybe a year or two into my sort of leadership, you know, start, they asked me to take over as the chief sales officer for the region, and really lead all of sales, both employee benefits and property and casualty. I was so excited about that. And, you know, I knew that I worried initially about moving from being in sales and being a producer and getting my own book to moving into that leadership position, but I knew I made the right decision because I was always way more happy when somebody else that I was coaching or mentoring won than when I won, you know? So I did the sales leadership side for about 4.5 years for HUB on the CSO front. And then in 2017, our president, current CEO and president, left the organization, and I was asked by our corporate executive leadership team to step in and take over the region as the president and CEO. So I've been in this role for, you know, a few years now, since 2017. We're just super fortunate. We have an incredible group of people. We believe very strongly in them, and, you know, I feel lucky every single day just to be part of it and supporting them. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you have to pinch yourself every once in a while and make sure you're not dreaming, because they really are a good group. And we've worked very hard at that, and really, you know, are fortunate to have such a good group of very, very talented insurance professionals working for us across the state.
Yeah, and you used the term earlier, that Cinderella story just pinched me. So you started out as a sales executive, you rose to CEO over a 13-year process. What do you think was most critical to that success over that time frame, especially being in a male-dominated industry?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I always joke that there's never a line at any of the conferences at the women's restroom, because there's very few, you know, women from a leadership standpoint when you go to like an insurance conference. But, you know, I think that for me, I would just say determination. And, you know, I think when you want to get into leadership, you have to have a heart for it. Sometimes people want to get into leadership because of the perceived recognition it brings, but I think that that's the wrong reason, or the perceived, you know, compensation that it brings. And I always tell people, like, our producers make way more than our leadership team. So if you're getting into it for the money, you're getting into it for the wrong reason. Go into sales. That's where they make all the money. But, you know, I think for me, when it comes naturally, when you have a heart for it, when you really, you know, care about, you know, putting all the pieces together and helping people be successful, and that's what drives you and gets you out of bed every morning. I think it just becomes a natural evolution that you work towards that and drive towards that. And that was for me kind of always, you know, what I did. And, you know, I think the other thing too is performing well in your current position and then letting people know that you're interested in something else, you know, or something more. You know, that's the best way to get anywhere, right? If you're not doing well in your current role, but you're asking to go up the ladder, I think that's a pretty hard ask. So just being really, really good at what you're doing speaks for itself, right? People start to say, oh, she's really good at what she does. So then when you say, hey, I want to do this now, they look for ways to help you get there.
Eric, from the HR perspective, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just, and without sounding like an interview here, but what would you say was one of the biggest surprises when you hit the C-suite?
EBITDA. No, I think learning all of the financial stuff, because, leadership for me was always about the people and coaching and mentoring people. And so really understanding the business side of it and getting good at marrying the people side of it with the financial side of it, which isn't always easy, right? So I think that was a surprise. I knew that was part of it, but I knew what the job entailed, but just even when I thought I was prepared, I think I could have been more prepared by spending more time asking a lot of questions from the person who was in the role before me and spending more time learning it. I was not expecting to get into the role so quickly. So part of it was a little bit of a, surprise on my side. There's never an excuse. You should always be prepared, I guess. So I had to learn really fast on the fly. When I told Eric earlier, sometimes we send people to war to learn to be a soldier. And, I think that, just getting into a seat, even when you're not completely ready, you learn really quickly.
Yeah, I think you made a great point earlier, and this was off camera. We had a chance to get introduced to each other in, I guess, what is our green room now. Yeah. But we talked a little bit about colleges and MBA programs and how well they prepare you for the business. But do they adequately prepare people in your mind to have a career? And if not, where do you think we should be helping people?
Yeah, I think with all schooling, I think schooling is good, but I also think that our education is good. There's definitely value in education. But I think that a lot of times, with, an MBA program or really any kind of, program like that, are we adequately preparing people? I think only life experience really adequately prepares people, right? There's some things you just can't teach. You can't teach having to have a really difficult conversation with somebody. I mean, you could practice that, but until you get into that situation and know how you react, getting challenged by employees, getting challenged by executive leadership, those are all things it's hard to practice those things, right? Until you get into the role and really have that experience, it's hard to prepare people for it. And I think, spending time, especially if you aspire to be in leadership, spending time with people who are in leadership and, picking their brain about, how does this work, and asking a lot of questions. For example, our HR director is on our executive leadership team. And, one of the things I love about her is, she came, when she got into that seat, when we essentially promoted her onto our leadership team, within the first 2 months, she came to us and she said, I don't understand the financials. Can you sit down, with me and go through that? And I love that. That to me says, hey, I'm really interested in understanding how this whole business works, not just the part that I'm responsible for. And so I think it's asking a lot of questions.
So when you're a CEO, does it feel lonely at the top? Do you have any support group to not always wear the CEO hat where you can just share your stresses?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge I think that every CEO faces. And certainly it's hard because, you don't have, within my leadership team, the people who report to me, there's things that I can't share with them, especially if it's specific about other people on the leadership team. I think I'm fortunate in the fact that at HUB, there's 27 other people that sit in the same seat as me in many other regions. So we do share, conversations and ideas and thoughts. And, at the executive level for corporate, I'm fortunate enough to report to a gentleman by the name of Neil Hughes, who I can go to him with just about anything. And he's sat in this role before in another region. And so, he's kind of my sounding board when, I'm not sure which direction to go. And so it's good to have somebody from that standpoint. I was part of YPO for a short period of time. I didn't find that I connected well necessarily with kind of, what was happening within the chapter. It's no slam on them, and I certainly don't expect them to cater to me. But it just wasn't a good fit for me. But I think a lot of people find value in those kind of groups where they can be with other CEOs and get feedback, from them, or share challenges or problems. Because that is an issue. You're going to run into things as the CEO or in any leadership role where, it is difficult to make a decision, or, how to tell people something that's a difficult message. Sometimes you just want somebody else to listen to it first, right?
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier, Caroly, was that our head of HR is on the executive team, and that was something that stuck out to me specifically because I know that a lot of the narrative for HR is often, how do we get more of a seat at the table? How do we get the ear of the executive suite? So, you know, from your perspective, and Eric, I'd love to have you chime in on this as well. What would be your best advice for HR who's trying to get more involved at that executive level and have more of an ear from someone such as yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, you know, our current HR lead, you know, when she came in, she was not part of the executive leadership team. She was with us for, I believe, a year before we ended up putting her into a seat on the executive leadership team. And, you know, really for me, it was about the readiness of sitting at the table. And part of the reason that she got there as quickly as she did was Shannon was really good at taking herself out of her current role and looking at the business as a whole. I think sometimes it's hard when you're in a seat to elevate yourself above where you are and look at it like you're their board of directors and say, I need to think about the whole picture here, not just the piece I'm responsible for. And Shannon had just an uncanny knack of doing that. In every situation, she had a wonderful sort of emotional intelligence about her, where she could handle really difficult conversations and really difficult things really well. And so we were very impressed with that with her. And then I think the other big thing with Shannon was she's such a highly determined and driven individual. There was times when I'm like, you've already done every initiative that I could have ever dreamed of, and you're like 10 steps ahead of me. Like, you've already thought like 50 years down the road of like what's going to happen. And so we were always just super impressed with her ability to have sort of a vision for where she wanted to go, but not have it be so far out there that it didn't align with the business as a whole, and recognize that the business is a, you know, for-profit business, and that we have a vision of where the business needs to go. And she was really good at just, you know, seeing that and aligning with that. So I think it's, you know, my biggest advice would be for any HR professional, you know, having a seat at the table would be, you got to understand what's the most important thing to your CEO, you know, and you got to put some of that aside for a minute and find out like what's important to the CEO, what's important to the organization, and help them drive that vision, because when you do that, you become really valuable to that person, and they want you at the table, right? They want you to sit there with them because they need you. And so it became really clear really fast. We needed her at the table. We needed her creative brain. We needed her drive and her determination. And it was clear. It was pretty clear pretty quickly.
Yeah, one of the things you tend to see in HR, and this is and whenever I talk to CEOs, one of the most common frustrations I hear is HR still tends to see themselves as an administrative function, and they're not good at seeing themselves as a strategic business partner and part of the strategic business planning process. And what words of advice do you have when you take not just HR leaders, but anybody? How do you become part of the strategic business planning process when you are still at that mid-level part of your career?
Yeah, you know, I think, I mean, I would just go back to kind of what I said earlier. I think finding ways that you can, you know, if you're aspiring to move up or to be recognized as a strategic part of a business, it's putting aside your agenda and finding out what is important to the business and what drives that business forward. And it might not be something they're doing currently, but it's that flux of ideas, right? Of, you know, giving, you know, ideas to the CEO, but also listening to that leadership team and finding out, you know, what are their initiatives, what are they driving, and how can you help? Because every time, you know, somebody is willing to help, I mean, we're all super busy, so we love that. But I think that's where, you know, where our HR director really, you know, shines, is she was already thinking that way before she even got invited to be part of the leadership team. and doing that without being asked. And, you know, other people that have now been put onto our leadership team, we had a young woman who, you know, we asked to handle sort of our local finances. We have a corporate finance team that handles sort of the big picture stuff, but we manage a lot of our own, you know, team P&Ls and things like that. And, you know, she was basically promoted up to from being a financial analyst on the employee benefits side. And again, she worked for me for about 6 months, but she was so smart and so strategic and so good at what she did. And again, she was like doing stuff that we didn't even know was possible. And, you know, again, like 3 steps ahead of us on like, she knew her space and she knew it well, and she knew where we should go. And it was so impressive. Like we ended up putting her on the executive leadership team as well, because we just saw that initiative to do it, right? I didn't wait to be asked. I came up with something really cool that you should all see, right?
Cool. I feel like we're naturally walking into a topic that has been really significant for our podcast as of late, and something that we plan to continue to discuss, and that is career advancement and career placement. So some of what I'm hearing from you is it's a lot about kind of offering up yourself, you know, knowing what the business need is. But I also think it sounds really important that you have a manager, someone ahead of you who sees the value in you and is willing to pull that out. You know, James, from your perspective, you've had a pretty interesting career climb. What was really critical to your success throughout your process?
I think setting goals and putting in the work effort to achieve those goals in the beginning. And then once you get to a certain level, you can't do everything. So as a CEO, you have to trust your team, but also get the most out of your team. So what I wanted to hear from you is, how do you deal with the different personalities? I'm sure you can't have the exact same style with your CFO as you do with your HR director, as you do with everybody else. Like, do you adapt to them, or do you make them adapt to you? Or do you just have conflict in a way that is still healthy, yet you're combative? I want to hear the dirt.
Yeah. So we
changes back to healthy conflict.
I tell everybody on our leadership team, there's really just a couple of things I expect of the leadership team. I call it an obligation to dissent, which basically means like, I don't want everybody to agree. If we ever get to the point where we all agree all the time, like we have done something wrong. We need to have conflict. We need to have people who think about things differently and view things differently. And when you get a leadership team that's too closely aligned all the time and they all think exactly the same, I think you end up in this like sort of kind of scary herd cult mentality that I've seen in other leadership teams, and it really isn't good for a culture in general. So, you know, we do challenge ourselves to pick people on the leadership team that are different and will challenge us. So that's kind of the first thing, is that, you know, obligation of dissent. And the second thing is trust. Like, I've been on leadership teams before where everybody has their own fiefdom and they only care about themselves, and that is not okay. We will argue about things within our, you know, monthly or our weekly meeting, but at the end of the day, when we walk away, we all agree that we have each other's back. So whether I agree with, you know, the final decision that we all made or not 100%, I support it, because that's, you know, the most important thing is it doesn't matter which one of the 7 of us you talk to, you should hear the same message from all of us. So I think those are really important things from a leadership standpoint. And, you know, they're things I keep pushing us to do. And I tell people all the time, like, I'm not always right. Like, even on this podcast, my God, don't go do what I say. Go do what you think is right, right? Everybody's different. But, you know, I think that if people aren't willing to speak up in a leadership meeting, we have a real problem, a much bigger problem than anything else we could ever face.
I think
we talk a lot about speed of trust and trust in the workplace. Give us an example of a time when you had speed of trust and how it advantaged the business.
So as far as like just trusted in a decision that somebody made, or be more specific?
Just trust in each other.
Yeah, so I can tell you that we, I guess the thing that I would say is we've had some extremely heated arguments that I would say were borderline like shouting kind of arguments in leadership meetings. In fact, we had one this morning. And, I think that we all walked away with different opinions, but at the end of the day, I think that what happens is when you are willing to disagree about something, you come to the best answer. And so I think what happened, with this particular circumstance is the person who challenged it, they had a really good idea that if they hadn't said, hey, like, I think that's not right, we would have kept going down the same path. And we did have a pretty heated argument about that, but I think we all walked away feeling good about where we landed on it, right? Everybody had an opportunity to say what they thought. And that's what's best for the business, because if we just kept on keeping on and nobody ever challenged the status quo, we wouldn't evolve as a business or as a leadership team. And I always tell our leadership team, our people deserve our best, and our people deserve our time and attention on these topics, right? That people like Danielle, they deserve that from us. So, I think it does make a better organization. And if everybody just clamps it and moves on, it just creates resentment within the leadership team. And then you have a pretty unstable leadership team.
What are your thoughts on friendships in the workplace? And, did you ever have a perception of the HR person getting favored because they used to be at a lower level, or when you were on the sales team, you have certain friends you spent more time with? So is there any perception that you favor someone over another based on private relationships? And how do you handle that?
So I treat work and friendship very differently. There are certainly people within the organization that I have friendships with, especially since I kind of grew up through the organization in the sales side. I've definitely developed friendships, but I think one of the ways that I know that I've done a fairly good job of managing those two situations completely separately is one of the people I would say is my very best friend, a couple of people I've actually vacationed with almost every year. Our HR director had been on staff for, almost 2 years, and I mentioned that during a leadership meeting as an example of separating friendship from, being in a leadership role. And she's like, I had no idea that you were that close to those people. So, I think it's a matter of, I have in my mind separated it. Like, I expect those people to perform just like I expect every other person in the organization to perform. And I think the way you build trust in an organization is you react consistently the same way in almost every situation, right? When something happens, if I react differently this time and the next time I handle it a completely different way based on the person, you don't build any trust within your team or within your company. So I think, I've been very, very careful about that and worked really hard at not favoring people. I also happen to be extremely lucky in that the people I would count as very close friends are very talented, and it makes my job a little bit easier because they're really good at what they do. But certainly, those people don't report directly to me, and their boss knows very much that they can hold those people accountable just like they hold everybody else accountable.
It's kind of interesting hearing you pull back the curtain a little bit on all of this, because, I don't get as much a glimpse into the leadership side of things. I'm obviously on the producer side. So I love hearing what you said about some of the healthy back and forth that you have to make sure that you're really thinking from all angles. Because my experience has been that everyone gets along so extremely well. Yeah. And, in an earlier podcast, we talked about best and worst managers. And I gave this story, this dichotomy, a tale of two cities of this horrible female boss I had earlier on in my career, and how it's such a huge contrast against what I've experienced so far under your leadership at HUB. And we have a ton of incredible men and women, but we're 70% female workforce. So there's a lot of women who are very hardworking, aggressive, amazing, intelligent women, and everyone gets along so well. What do you attribute that to? And is that by design?
I think we, as a leadership team, have had to make some really tough decisions. We kind of, when I took over, I said right away, like, we have this kind of like no jerk rule, so to speak, and maybe a little stronger word I used, but we actually did have to make some tough decisions about people who had been with the organization a very long time that were just culturally cancerous, and we're making our organization feel bad for people, right? I mean, there was a lot of like gossip and rumors and that sort of thing. And we got really clear on, as a leadership team, we got really clear on who are our ideal people, right? Well, what was the ideal person at HUB? And really for us, it's kind of the core 4 values that we have, which are determination, ownership, teamwork, and sincerity. And, we focus on hiring people that basically get a plus in every single one of those. And so we, I think really early on, we got really comfortable with the fact that not everybody is for us, and we're not for everybody. And we're completely comfortable with that and okay with it. People will come here and they'll find out that they can't live up to those ideals and be part of that culture, and that's okay. They're just not going to be able to be part of us, right? And so a lot of times those people realize that early on and they self-select out, but we've had to help people make that decision too before. But again, we're just comfortable knowing, if we're going to put everybody on the bus together, like, we want everybody to be going in the same direction. That makes the company run a lot better, right? So that's been something we've worked really hard at over the last, few years. And I think it's paid off. I always tell people we're no utopia. People are human and they make mistakes and they say things that aren't very nice and, all of those sorts of things. But it's really how we work through them together when they do happen.
Eric, in your experience, working from the HR side of things, how often are you in an organization that is willing to make those decisions and cut out those cancerous, for lack of better words, individuals, or is this a rarity from your perspective?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that it's a rarity in organizations that are floundering. So I think if you see organizations that are getting tractions and organizations that are doing well, they're very introspective and they do a very good job of evaluating who they are and why they are. And I would use a different term. I wouldn't call it cutting out something cancerous. I always look at it as round peg in a round hole. Because most of the times when you have someone who's not fitting and not clicking, you're not happy, but they're not happy. I mean, it's just not a good fit and it's not a good mix, and they don't enjoy it and you don't enjoy it, and it just tends to cause waves from all fronts. And a lot of times realigning them, or what my old boss used to call introduce them to their next opportunity, you're doing everyone a favor. And if you look at it from the perspective of I'm going to add value to everybody, even that person that I'm going to have to maybe separate or maybe move off of a leadership team, I'm going to do it in a way that adds value to them and puts them in a position to add more value moving on.
My question is a tough one, and I've been attending a lot of national seminars, and I'm seeing the turnover is probably higher now than it has been in other decades in the workforce in general. And so I feel like CEOs have to essentially share their, plan for their employees of how Danielle could develop to the next level and maybe be a future leader someday. And so I guess my question to you is, where are you at in your succession planning thought process? And have you already identified your potential replacement someday?
Yeah, so HUB's done a really good job. They went through an exercise with us that they kind of update every year from an executive leadership standpoint, where we go through the process of sort of succession planning. I mean, I obviously have a lot of runway left in my career, but what if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? Then what happens? Like, who steps into that role? But to your point about developing employees, I think that one of the things that Shannon took on early on when she became our HR director was working through the process of recognizing that, there's people that often aspire to move up in the organization in their careers, even if it's not leadership. Maybe it's, moving from an associate account manager to an account manager, or an account manager to an account executive. And so what she's done is actually put together a program that kind of takes, a look at where they are and then where they would have to be to get to that next level, and then identifies those gaps. And then we pair them with a mentor that has specific objectives that they work with that person on over the course of time. And you can put your hat in the ring to be in the program, but you have to have sign off by your manager. And, there's definitely some steps and some things that candidate has to be willing to commit to if they're going to be in the program. Because, we don't want people that go into it expecting us to, we're nobody's fairy godmother. We're not going to wave the magic wand and make them who they want to be. They have to be willing to put the work in. And so if they're willing to put the work in, then so are we, and we work with them to get there. And I think that's been well received. And, obviously that started at the end of last year, pre-COVID, and then COVID sort of put a monkey wrench in a lot of plans. So we are trying to, get back on track with, some of those initiatives and get people kind of back on track on that program. But I think it's a good way to give, people an opportunity to start to explore what that next role could look like.
And I can speak to that from the other side of the table. Sorry, Eric. I was just going to say, from my side of the fence, I certainly see the cause and effect of that, because I feel like in the time that I've been at HUB, I have had leadership reach out to me multiple times to say, how can we help you? How can we give you the career that you're working towards? You had mentioned you're interested in leadership. What do you think that looks like? Let's figure out how to get you there. So I definitely think it's a two-way street. And, I can say that you're walking the walk, because everything that you've said so far is certainly ringing true for me.
Thanks. I hope so.
Sorry, Eric, I cut you off earlier.
We go off site as a leadership team quarterly and set what we call rocks, right? There are our big goals for the quarter. And part of that meeting, whenever we do that, is really to, kind of list people that we know are aspiring to do something bigger than what they're currently doing, or different than they're currently doing. I think the most frustrating thing that can happen for anyone is that they want to do something different. They want to grow in their career, and it doesn't feel like there's any opportunity, or it doesn't feel like it's as urgent for anybody else as it is for them. And I call this like the ER syndrome. Like, you take your sick kid to the ER, and it feels like no one's as urgent as you are about your sick child. So, we want to make sure that they feel like it's as important to us as it is to them, because usually those people that are asking to move up are talented people, right? They're good at what they do, and we want to give them those opportunities, or find a way to start to bridge the gap so that they don't feel like they're just sitting around waiting for somebody to do something.
I think that emergency room is a great analogy, right? Because as my brother-in-law will always say, the emergency room is the one place you want to go and not get a lot of attention, right? Because the people getting the attention are not doing well. But people's viewpoint of the emergency room is, well, if I can just get to the emergency room, everything will be okay.
Yeah.
But that's not their job. Their job is to keep you from dying, not to provide overall health care.
Right.
But people, I think employees tend to look at succession planning in that same way. Mm-hmm. They tend to say, well, the succession plan will take care of me if I can just get on that list, if I can just get on a slate. But that's not what that slate is for. Right. You have to take holistic responsibility for your career. You need to have a vision, determine what that vision is. I believe you have to say it out loud, and you have to actualize it into the universe. And then you go and systematically work your way towards it. But the number one thing, I'm going to go back to what you started with, you've got to do a good job of today.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing a good job of today, no succession plan in the world will work for you.
Yeah, and I think you have to make it known that you want to do, I've had so many times where we've promoted somebody and then somebody else was like, I can't believe you didn't even ask me. And I'm like, we didn't even know you're interested, So I think, I always say toot your own horn, but find a way to make sure somebody knows that you're interested in that. But, 100% of it is always going to come down to be really good at what you do before you expect to move to another spot, right? And I have seen people that they're not doing good work in their current role, and they are flabbergasted when they don't get a promotion. And I think that falls on both them and leadership, because if leadership's doing a good job of being realistic with them about where they are in their career and how they're doing, then I think that they're not surprised when they don't get it. But it's a kind of a two-way street, right? The employee has to be willing to put in the time, and the leadership has to be willing to have an honest conversation.
So James, in this litigious society, what do you think about giving people open and honest feedback that you're not doing well?
I think for sure you don't want any surprises.
Yeah.
I think as far as being open and honest, if you were terminating somebody, you don't want to give them 101 reasons of why they are to be terminated either. I think you stick to big picture and identify an area with facts of where you believe they could do better. If you already gave up on them, I think you want to make sure there was enough check-ins along the way so they aren't surprised.
Right. Yeah, I mean, people shouldn't find out you're dissatisfied with their performance the day you terminate them, for sure. That'd be very bad.
Yeah. But we've all seen it, right? We've all seen the employee who's gotten middle of the road performance reviews 4 or 5 years in a row, and next thing you know, they're sitting in my office saying, I want to terminate this person. And I'm saying, well, based on what?
Yeah.
Well, they've been terrible for years. Well, it doesn't say that on paper. Well, we didn't want to be mean. So how do you coach that into the organization, that you're not being mean, you're being responsible?
Yeah, I think that's hard. I think that's a human nature thing, right? It's people, have this perceived, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And, I've long said, look, you're going to hurt their feelings far more when they find out how unhappy you've been with them for the past 2 years and haven't been willing to, tell them that. I think every employee deserves to know how they're doing, and, not in a mean way, but in a way that says, hey, like here's where you're doing great, and here's where we think, there's opportunity for you to improve, right? And I think if you haven't had those conversations with employees, and then you're in a place where you've got to, you just want to get rid of them, that's a problem. How do you coach it? I mean, it's, I don't know if you've ever read there's a story it's about this restaurant and this guy, and he tells them, it's this constant general pressure thing, right? You have to keep this constant general pressure. So you have to just keep reminding people and telling them this. But anyway, his whole premise is, he puts the salt shaker in the middle of the table, and then he tells the guy, put the salt shaker in the middle of the table. So the guy does that. He moves it. He goes, I'll put it back in the middle of the table. So they go back and forth 3 or 4 times. And he goes, your employees are like, like me, moving it out of the center of the table. You're putting it back, right? So it's just a matter of like that constant like reinforcement of this is what we have to do. And some people get it and some people don't, but it's the only way to kind of get through to people sometimes.
From a legal standpoint, how important is that, paper record, James, for once you do go to let someone go, and maybe you have given them, semi-decent reviews because you feel bad? Does that put the company in a difficult position when it comes time to let that person go?
Extremely, especially in Michigan, because we have a law called the Michigan Bullard-Plawecki Employee Right to Know Act. So the employees are entitled to their paper file, and if you give them positive reviews or glowing reviews, and they can prove another employee that had worse feedback that is still there, that gives them a basis to believe they were treated unfairly, and that's where the lawsuits become a lot more likely.
Thanks. Well, so what are our takeaways after this great conversation with Caroly? Eric?
Yeah, so my takeaway is just re-amplified that HR especially, but you've got to be a business partner first. And if you can stop talking so much about what the organization will do for you and start talking about what you can do to the organization, that's how you really move up. But thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was nice to meet you in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
James, how about you? Thoughts?
Yeah, a couple takeaways were, one, when you're ready, you got to let people in leadership know.
Yeah.
So they can kind of observe you from that angle and know you're looking for more. And I think, too, there's nothing more important than trust and you have to earn that hat or keep that hat for 13 years at least. So
right.
if you would have blown trust issues earlier on, that would have impacted you with your leadership goals along the way. So I think everything I hear from all these podcasts is that trust is, the most fundamental thing we need to have with each other.
Important. And my takeaway is, gosh, succession planning. I better get on the phone with you after this podcast and tell you what I think my future looks like at HUB.
Absolutely.
And then buckle down and do a good job.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
He's already doing a good job, so
Thank
that's
you.
easy.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being with us today, Caroly. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
All right.
So Danielle, one more thing in closing here. I just want to remind everybody to watch this space, because we have our exciting webinar coming up here in a few weeks. We're going to be talking about your dream job and what does that mean? How do you define it? And how do you go out and get it? So keep your eyes on this space, and there should be some more fun coming.
That's right.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hold on, I gotta figure this out. I'm not used to being the one recording. How do